Sort of a silly question, but I guess, we could go somewhere with this. If blindness were really a country, who you voting for president?
You've got my vote, Thomas.
Oh, no, I don't want the vote. I am not. That's the last time I ask a silly question. My guest today is Andrew Leland.
Writer, editor, producer, teacher. My pronouns are he, him. I am a white guy with glasses, short brown hair, wearing a sweatshirt. There's certainly people who I think would nominate themselves. Like, you want me to name like a particular human being?
I mean, you don't have to if you don't want to. What are the qualifications that you would think would make a good president of the country of the blind?
The people that I'm drawn to, generally speaking, these are people who probably don't want to be politicians and wouldn't take the job. But, I really love blind people who are creative and who aren't rejecting their blindness, but they're also not really defined by it. And they're sort of using it as this sort of creative aspect of themselves. So it's sort of like not for it, not against it, but like with it. I can think of a number of people who I write about in the book too.
Well, you're going to have to read the book, The Country of the Blind, to find out who else can get Andrew's vote. I'm Thomas Reed. This is Read My Mind Radio, and I approve this message. Read my mind. Read my mind. Radio. Whether you're blind, disabled, or in any way identify as someone in a marginalized group, chances are you thought about what life would be like in a place where you are accepted and your needs are centered. Maybe even just considered? Andrew Leland's first book, The Country of the Blind, isn't a fictional place, but rather it's about something much more real.
I have a degenerative retinal condition called RP, retinitis pigmentosa. I knew that I was going blind since I was a teenager, but for a really long time, it felt abstract, distant, and not worth thinking about. Another way to say not worth thinking about might be like I was sort of in denial, as I think a lot of people are with RP. It's very easy to be in denial about it because it's like, well, sure, I might be going blind, but I'm like driving a car and scoring the winning goal over here. There's no blindness anywhere near here. And then it caught up with me.
Over the years of doing this podcast, and even prior, I've spoken to a lot of people experiencing blindness, low vision, vision loss. No matter what you call it, or the reason for the loss, denial is commonplace. And so too is the fact that it will catch up.
I'm about to turn 43, and I would say it was about 8-10 years ago that I really started noticing blindness intruding into my life, into my day-to-day, in a way that I couldn't ignore it. It was around that time that I started using a white cane full-time in public. As soon as I started using the white cane in front of my partner, in front of colleagues, walking down the street in front of strangers, it made me blind in the eyes of other people. It forced me to think of myself as blind. And that was really the beginning of the writing process for me.
Andrew began first exploring blindness as a journalist.
From KCRW and McSweeney's, this is The Organist. I'm Andrew Leland. If you watch any of Stevie Wonder's appearances on talk shows, he'll frequently make a gentle and not especially funny joke at his own expense. And it's always about his blindness.
This is Radiolab, and today we're going to start
All right, here we go.
with reporter Andrew Leland.
I'm just going to hold my mic like I'm doing a karaoke.
Where are you on planet Earth? Where are you doing karaoke from?
I'm in Long Beach, California. All right, so now I'm just going to wander around talking to people, gathering it all.
Can you talk about the art of writing in general and maybe how important it is and has been in your life?
It's one of the most important things in my life. There's this phrase that I think about sometimes, which we usually think about in terms of like technology, which is a word processor. Microsoft Word is a word processor. The computer is helping you process words. There's something in that idea that you're processing in kind of a lot of different ways when you're writing. Emotional processing. I use the word metabolizing a lot too. There's something that happens, like an experience, and the experience is a little bit just like this meal that you just swallowed down, but like you've got to digest it. For me, like writing is such a crucial part of that process of metabolizing what it is that I'm feeling and experiencing in the world.
This probably sounds familiar to those who journal. It not only gives you an opportunity to purge all of the things running through your mind, but literally, it enables you to process those thoughts and emotions.
I had some ideas about what blindness meant to me, but now that I've written the book, I've kind of given myself a little bit of a map to my own feelings and my own thoughts about it that I would never have arrived at without the work of writing.
To be a good writer, you have to be a reader, and I'm assuming you're a big reader.
Yes, I love reading. So when I started writing the book in 2019, I still was kind of hanging tough with print. I couldn't even imagine a life after print. It was such a deep part of my life, and I was very, very unwilling to let go of it. The tricky thing about RP is it's not like you just wake up one day you can't read print anymore. It's the kind of thing where literally it will happen over the course of a decade. And at a certain point, you have to just sort of decide like, okay, this is actually more trouble than it's worth.
A decision each individual has to make for themselves. Yet, there are some real-world things to consider as a guideline.
I had a Kindle, and I just like kept on cranking the size up and up and up. I had started to meet enough blind people and talk to enough blind people. The writing was on the wall. They were like, text-to-speech, man, it's where it's at. You've just got to listen. I just sort of went all in and kind of made it like a project for myself. Like, I'm going to learn how to read text-to-speech. It took me a while until I found VoiceStream Reader. That app was a game changer for me. And Bookshare, which is an online library for blind and print disabled folks, which has millions of titles. Those two tools in unison, that's the power combo for me. Over the course of the last 3 years, while I was writing the book, I was also kind of training myself to be a blind reader.
What about Braille? You mentioned that in the book. You were headed that direction.
Yep. Yeah, I'm holding tough with Braille. I mean, it's incredibly frustrating to be so slow after so many years. I think I started in 2020, maybe, or 2019 even. It's been a journey.
In the book, Andrew discusses first learning Braille with a sighted instructor. Then, a seasoned Braille reader gave him some strong advice.
That guy is teaching you bad habits, like get rid of him. And I was like, oh, right, blind people know how to read Braille. Like that guy was sighted, and I don't think he knew what he was doing. And then I found the Hadley Institute, amazing service. It's a free mail order correspondence course for Braille. If you hang with it, do everything they tell you to do, you'll come out the other side with Braille. I'm still super slow. I try to touch Braille at least once a day just to like keep it in circulation. Last night, I tried to read a book to my kid. My Father's Dragon is a great kid's book that we've read before. I've read that book a bunch of times with him already, so I sort of know the sentences, but still, I just sound like, then he said, hey, guys, how long can I expect my son, who's 11 now, to like roll with me on that? And he's sort of like patient because he knows I'm like trying to get better, but it's a struggle.
Every aspect of our lives are affected by disability. Jobs or our careers are a real concern. It's the way we make money, feel a sense of purpose. For many, it's how we identify. It's often the first thing we ask when meeting someone new. So what do you do? Prior to reading The Country of the Blind, I assumed a writer experiencing blindness would have an easier time moving forward in their career. Magnification or screen reading software, along with word processors and access to the internet, chances are they can perform the work. But actually being able to perform the work is only part of the struggle.
The kind of writing that I like to do most, which is going out into the world, hanging out with people that I want to write about, taking notes, and then doing research, reading articles, and so on. The heart of it is that reporting process where you're out on the scene, long-form narrative nonfiction. You gather facts, but you also gather sensory data. And like any creative writer has to have sensory impressions. If you think about literature or the novel, it's all about these visual descriptions of people, and those are sort of these windows into their character. So I think about that a lot, both on the level of like just being an artist and having artful sensory descriptions that convey this kind of mood that I want, but also as a journalist, am I going to be reporting somewhere and miss the story because I can't see it?
That's understandable, especially if you're new to disability and unfamiliar with an adaptive way of thinking or creating accommodations. But this is 2024, and there are lessons to be learned from those who blaze trails before we ever set foot on a new path. Andrew tells us about one such example.
Ved Mehta, who moved to the United States from India when he was a kid, he ended up becoming a staff writer at The New Yorker, which is one of the premier places to publish that kind of narrative nonfiction. He was there during the celebrated William Shawn era, writing nonfiction with one of the greatest nonfiction editors of all time.
Mehta, who was totally blind and on staff, still had to deal with questioning around aspects of his writing.
He would write these dispatches from different places where he would talk about his subjects' twinkling, wintry eyes set against the mahogany brown of his study and so on. He would have an assistant often with him. Mehta was doing the interview and he was doing the writing, but he might say to the assistant, describe his eyes for me, and use that.
Precede just about any occupation with the word blind, and I'm pretty sure a version of this conversation exists questioning the blind person's accommodation. Blind accountant, blind programmer, blind orientation and mobility instructor, blind audio description narrator or writer.
Maybe if I'm using Be My Eyes virtual volunteer 5 years from now, if I'm reporting and I use that to gather some details about somebody's pronounced cheekbones or their tousled hair, I think that that's a totally legitimate way to report. You can look at that as an accommodation. Ved Mehta needs an assistant in some context to fully do the reporting he needs, or I might need Be My Eyes to finish the job. People look at that as like almost a disqualification. You didn't run the race unassisted. You had this help.
The unfairness, the hypocrisy makes my blood boil.
But I think if you take a step back and you look at technology or even just like tools in general, we're all getting assistance all the time from each other, from other people, and from technology. Disability might mean you need a different kind of tool, different kind of technology, different kind of personal assistance, but it's not categorically different. If you think about any journalist, any writer, if they're sighted, don't need assistance in gathering visual details, but they certainly are reporting things that they haven't seen with their own eyes. Almost any piece of nonfiction writing will have a reconstruction. If I'm writing a story and I want to talk about when you first became a podcaster, I might interview you and say, okay, describe the scene for me. Where were you? What was the day like? What were you wearing? Tell me all of it. And then I write that scene as though I were there, even though it was 20 years ago and I was 100 miles away.
The same people questioning accommodations go gaga for AI. Ableism is real. Ableism isn't just an external thing done to those who are disabled. In the country of the blind, Andrew bravely shares an experience where he attends a local chapter meeting of the NFB in Missouri. Here's an excerpt from the book with Andrew narrating.
I had noticed the blind woman in a wheelchair using a strange device that looked like it somehow converted the text on a laptop screen into metallic braille. I'd noticed the other people with multiple disabilities and the modest scale at which the group was operating, arguing over how to spend their tiny publicity budget. If I had gone to the meeting to find other blind people whom I might commiserate with or learn from or befriend, the first impression was more off-putting than I had expected. Part of it was surely just geographical culture shock, but a greater part was a different kind of culture shock, our discomfort with disability.
What do you think your experience would be like now, knowing what you know and feeling how you feel if you went to that meeting for the first time? How do you think it would be different?
Just to preface, it's me being super open about the, I guess you could call it internalized ableism that I felt, where I'm just looking at this group of blind people like, what do I have in common with any of these people? Like, get me out of here.
Andrew received some real criticism from blind people about this part of the book.
Today, in retrospect, going to that meeting now, like I know Gary Wonder was there. He's the editor of the Braille Monitor, somebody who is more engaged with blind intellectual life, which is something I'm deeply interested in than like most people in the world. That guy alone is somebody I should have like grabbed and had a long conversation with. But at the time, all I could see was a group of disabled people who felt very different from my image of myself. So having the patience to spend longer than I did spend at that meetup, having the courage to actually like talk to people as people rather than just look at them through this sort of othering gaze the way I did.
Yeah, I get it. For folks to get mad at that, I don't think they realize what's really going on. Like you being honest about that is that process of checking your own ableism. You can't get to a point without doing that work.
Totally.
Putting that in the book is inviting other people to do that too.
Thank you for pointing that out. Plenty of blind people said to me just what you've said, where they're like, that was me. And these are people, some folks who have been blind their whole lives. It's not like it's only somebody who's like has this sight privilege or somebody coming at it from the outside. I think any blind person can have that perspective, and many of them do. And I'm with you that it felt important to take that risk of making myself seem like a real jerk in order to expose some of that ableism that a lot of us carry around.
That's the other thing too, is that you included your wife. Did you talk to her before you included her in there? Because I was like, oh yeah, I don't know if I could do that.
I think she's within earshot listening to me talk to you right now. So, you might hear the door burst open and she might
come on in.
Jump on the mic. But yeah, I mean, like there were definitely moments where I was like, I want to write an interesting book, but I also want to be married for the rest of my life. And I don't want to jeopardize that. So there were a lot of tough conversations that we had. A journalist should never give their source a copy of the text to change. You can fact check it by saying like, is this true or not? But with Lily, it was a very different situation. Like we just sat down with the book in front of us multiple times, like, and did like sort of a find for her name and then just like read every sentence. What do you remember about this? And a lot changed in those conversations.
You can't overstate the importance of good communication. Having these conversations, no matter how uncomfortable, is so important to a relationship.
It was like a way for us to talk through some of those issues, even though a lot of that stuff was difficult. And like, I'm sure she would have been happy to see all of her name just like completely scrubbed from the book. I think to her credit, like she recognized the importance of including it for the same reason you just said about the picnic scene. Like, I don't think I had read a book that was really honest in that way about how difficult the partner's journey can be too, and the trickiness around the way that your partner is entering blindness at the same time you are. It was worth the difficulty and the risk in order to start that conversation, not just in my own family, but maybe in others as well.
Then there's the ableism we experience throughout society. In The Country of the Blind, Andrew writes about a poem read during a service at a synagogue.
The refrain that the poem says over and over again is, fall to your knees and thank God for your eyesight. You just sort of have to sit there with your family as like a whole room of people just sort of appreciates that they aren't blind. I certainly still encounter it. I think one thing that's changed is that moment marked the kind of beginning, I think, for not just me, but for my family to sort of have a politics around it. It was kind of wild to me that Lily found it annoying and that it wasn't just me.
Everyone in the family is adjusting to disability. The question is, will that be done alone or together?
My son, I feel like I've sort of trained him to be a critical thinker about it. And we'll be watching something and he'll sort of perk up when there's like a disability reference that seems off. He's in 5th grade, and at the beginning of the year, they were doing this exercise about guidelines for how to be a good community for each other. And one of them was like, be respectful even if the person has a disability. The line that caught his ear was, even if they have a disability. He raised his hand and was kind of like, I don't know about like even. And the teacher was like, oh yeah, that's good. Like something was bothering me about that, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. To me, that shows that he is really internalizing some of these critical disability thinking that I've sort of come to. That makes me feel really proud and excited.
What's your son's name?
Oscar.
Is that like a head nod to your grandfather?
It is.
Oh,
yeah.
Very cool.
He was a playwright. His name was Neil Simon. One of his best known plays that got turned into a TV show and a movie was The Odd Couple.
On November 13th, Felix Unger was asked to remove himself from his place of residence. That request came from his wife.
Famously mismatched roommates. My wife, Lily, when we were trying to think of baby names, she said, well, what about Felix? My first thought was The Odd Couple, because Felix is the sort of more fastidious, neurotic member of The Odd Couple. I was like, no, it can't be Felix. Oscar, now that's who you want to name him after. She wasn't even thinking of The Odd Couple.
I hope he's not like Oscar, though. He's not pulling out sandwiches from his bed or something like that.
He's got a little bit of both, I would say. He's got,
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
What was your experience, if any, with disability arts prior to 10 years ago when you opened up UCAN?
That's a good question. I think I'd encountered it in the art world when I first learned about the work of Christine Sun Kim. She's a deaf artist who does really interesting work around like sound or like representations of sound, interesting stuff with captions. It would have been on that level, or certainly like mainstream blind musicians. It would have hit me on that mainstream level. A movie, like I think Sound of Metal But really, it was not on my radar.
If they're in the mainstream, I don't consider that disability culture.
Huh.
That's just me. Are they making the art from a disability perspective? I think that's the way I draw that line.
My book is a mainstream book, like it's with a commercial publisher. I'm not, does that mean that like what I'm doing is not from a disability perspective? It's kind of a bigger question about identity. Does your work fall under the category of the identity just by virtue of your having the identity, or does the work have to like be about the identity for it to be included? I think it's kind of a spectrum.
What qualifies something as disability art? Disability culture? What makes someone a disability artist? Questions really worth exploring. I'll do some of that in the ongoing self-portrait episode.
That's the question that I've been wrestling with really like through the whole process of writing the book and figuring out my own identity as a blind person is like, is it supposed to be central or is it supposed to be incidental? When is it central? When is it incidental? I read an interview with this bioethicist who was blind named Adrienne Ash, who died a couple years ago. She was very adamant that blindness was totally incidental. Her friends joked that she was 20 before she realized she was blind because she just was like, it doesn't really affect my life. But then when she applied for a job and it was pretty obvious that she didn't get the job because she was blind, because the person was basically explicitly like, I don't know how we would hire a blind person, that's when she became blind. That's when it became a central part of her identity. That kind of politicizes it in a way that I don't totally track with. If we're talking about disability arts, I do want to center blindness as a writer in some ways. There's other times when I want it to be totally off to the side.
What has the response been like to date? And I'm wondering if there's any difference between blind and non-blind readers.
Yeah, it's been great. I've gotten some criticism, but my overwhelming experience has been one of people really responding positively to the book. It seemed safe to assume that like people whose experience was close to mine would be like, oh yeah, I recognize that. Like the first time I used a cane, stopping driving. But one of the things I learned in writing the book is that blindness is such a diverse experience, not only in the ways that people experience blindness, but also all kinds of other life experiences, intersectionalities that can inform one's relationship with disability. The cool thing for me after the book has come out has been just seeing folks whose experience is very different from mine also resonating with the book. That makes me feel like I captured something about blind culture, blind politics in 2023, the experience that extends beyond my narrow experience of it.
The response Andrew hears the most from those who are not blind?
I learned a lot. It's shocking sometimes how little people really stop to consider the experience of blindness. And so I think one thing the book has done is really just like cracked that world open a lot more for a lot more people.
What's some of the criticism you mentioned that you're receiving?
One of the things I really tried to do in the book is like not just have it be a memoir. I think the parts that people respond to the most are like me writing about my relationship with my son or with my wife, very emotional, personal moments. And I understand that. I think it's important to include those, but I also get pretty nerdy and talking about history of audio description or the history of Braille, history of the organized blind movement and NFB versus ACB versus AFB. Plenty of readers who didn't know anything about blindness pointed out that it's wild that there's like these ancient beefs between blind people. Why are blind people fighting? Aren't they supposed to be in solidarity with each other, fighting the fight to raise blind people up? There's certain readers who are like, dude, enough of the alphabet soup. I don't care. Let's move on. That's one criticism.
You should judge for yourself. Get the book.
The book is on Bookshare. It's on Bard. I read the audiobook myself. Every blind person who hears the audiobook is like, how the hell did you do that? The short answer is RP, 5% of my visual field still hanging in there.
You did a great job reading that book. Part of that, I'm sure, was from your podcasting experience and narration and stuff.
Totally, yeah.
You can learn more about Andrew, his work, and find him on social media by visiting his website, andrewleland.org. There really is something for everyone in this book. But here on Read My Mind Radio, we're especially interested in those adjusting to disability. While Andrew's experience is specifically about blindness, I want to strongly encourage those new to disability to read The Country of the Blind. You'll see yourself, your family. You'll hopefully confront your own feelings about what it means to be disabled. And don't worry, the final say is always up to you. So what's your current citizenship status for the country of the blind? You a citizen or you just visiting? What are we doing?
I've applied for a green card. It's been approved, and now I'm just like waiting in the mail for it. So I'm like technically a citizen, but I don't have like the full papers yet.
I can't give you those papers, but I can tell you that you are an official member of the Read My Mind radio family, sir.
Oh, that's much better news. That makes my day. I'm very happy. And I have to say, I didn't want to like mess things up by flattering you too much, but if we're really talking about blind president, you've got my vote. It's all you, Thomas.
Well, I appreciate that, but I am not running.
All right.
So, yeah.
Well, I'm still going to write you in. We're going to get my slate and stylus and braille you right onto the ballot.
There you go. All right. Well, if I get enough, I'll think about it.
All right.
I really do appreciate Andrew's vote. But even more than that, I appreciate all the effort put into the book, sharing his experiences and time with the Read My Mind radio family, sharing the art of adjustment. I'm very hopeful that Andrew will come back and share some of his experiences around audio description. We, of course, had a little conversation about that, but I think a future episode on what we were specifically talking about would be nice. That's all I'll say for now. Well, on that topic, at least. My fellow citizens, as we move forward together, united as one, no matter where we land on the spectrum called blindness, we should ask not what the blindness has done to us, but rather, what is it that we will do with our blindness? We should also remind ourselves to rock with Read My Mind Radio wherever you get podcasts. Transcripts and more are at readmymind.com. Just remember, that's R to the E.
D, and that's me in the place to be.
Like my last name. Peace. And may God bless humanity.